we've had a few questions come in from roundtables and on our social media channels, and I wanted to give it to ask you those questions and have you give us some answers to help people understand really what they're up against. So I've grouped the questions together. The first set of questions that we had come in were around why we think telecommunication companies are blocked when they're trying to digitize their older tools and services. So can you give us kind of a high-level overview of why you think telcos have a hard time with digital transformation?
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is obviously just a personal opinion, but I mean, a lot of what I see is that, you know, these companies came from serving phone lines and other things that, you know, that were done many years ago. And the biggest thing that I've seen is that their IT departments and their infrastructure doesn't keep up with what we can do in the cloud and what we can do. I mean, just, you know, modern IT. A lot of this stuff is still housed in proprietary data centers. You know, it's subject to, like, I've seen, you know, data centers go down because of power outages and things like that, where, you know, that's something that we don't really need to deal with anymore. Also, scaling concerns is a big thing. A lot of these folks or a lot of these companies don't have the means to scale adequately. On the cloud, we can scale almost infinitely and on demand, whereas when you're running on bare metal, when you're running your own, you know, data center, you've got to physically swap in hardware, you've got to move stuff around. And yeah, just a lot of older mentality, a lot of older data systems, a lot of unoptimized tables, a lot of, you know, yeah, just really low level, kind of like old hardware, old mentality, and not really getting into the cloud and where we can go with that and how we can, you know, basically have access to unlimited resources at the, you know, just snap of fingers, right?
Okay, so infrastructure is one of the biggest barriers.
Yeah, also I mean, also I've seen a lot of kind of older software as well, like using a lot of services that are using like SOAP services, for example, instead of RESTful services or GraphQL or some of the more modern ways of pulling data, ingesting data, or getting data out of their data centers. So yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff, and also going back to the security thing, like sometimes the security is just really hampering because it's and you know, for good reason, but I think there's more modern ways that we can have the same level of security, but not having to go and, you know, use some of the older, you know, like maybe having to log into a VPN all the time, right? We can get around that with, you know, lockdown security practice.
So Jesse, let's talk a little bit more about security. So you and I have spent a lot of years together working in telco specifically, and in that time, security is one of the biggest hoops. Something I remember when you're leading those projects is you're always hammering on to people about starting your security process at the start of the development process. Don't leave it to the end to make sure that it checks the boxes for security. So can you walk us through you know, the mentality around security at a telco, how it's governed, and how a telco can actually use an agency safely? Does that make sense? Can you comment on that a little bit? What does a telco normally ask of you, step one, for security? A lot of security audits, background checks, criminal record checks, specific pieces of hardware that they send to us as an agency. It's pretty intense. Can you walk us through what you normally see with security and how we work with that?
Yeah, so I mean, so yeah, starting at the bottom, I guess, would be, you know, like employee in like enrollment or engagement, however you want to word that. There's a lot of hoops you have to go through there. Criminal record check, criminal record check being one of them. They might even do like a background check. Then there's like an onboarding process you have to go through. You've got to get onboarded into their systems. You know, you get a manager assigned to you, all that other sort of stuff. Those are all pretty cumbersome operations, and I mean, we've had those. We've seen those just getting employees onboarded take like weeks, if not months. Actually, I think months would be the more correct answer there. So yeah, getting ahead of that is really important. The same thing kind of goes for security, where those tasks they take a long time to do. They're usually, I would say, when we first started and we didn't know we weren't aware of what was going to happen, or we hadn't been through the process before. It can be very daunting, but now, after the security teams also get to know you, your name, they know that when you put something down on these questionnaires that they give you, that they don't need to dig into the answer too much, because they've already verified that you know what you're doing, and you've got those check boxes ticked. So yeah, there's a lot of that, but going back to the getting ahead of it idea, is that we've learned that these things do take time. No matter how hard we try to press on them, you're not going to see these things turned around overnight, or even within a week, or probably even within a month. So we're always advising that we start these processes early. We get our infrastructure spun up as early as possible, so that we can get into the penetration scanning, deal with any feedback that comes from that. And then also what we do is we roll all that feedback into our standard boilerplate, so that, probably for the last 2 or 3 projects we've done, the feedback that we do get is just immediately remediated, because it's either a false positive, or we already have that covered in some other way, and we just kind of put a canned response back to the security team, and then they understand that that's already been dealt with, because we're rolling that out as part of our standard infrastructure playbook, right? So yeah, we do a number of things that we do like that, just to try to learn from the feedback we get, and then make it so that every time we go through that process, it's easier and easier and easier. And also the teams that we work with are getting more comfortable and all that sort of stuff. So yeah.
So as an agency, Acro Media, we have security experts on staff, but we by no means try to overwrite security experts at a telco. They know their industry regulation and governance, and we follow their path and then apply our web knowledge on top of that and work together. Would that be accurate?
Yep. And a lot of times these companies, they have their own, everything's usually based off of the PCI standard or something close to that, because that's a very rigid standard that a lot of the world uses when it comes to security. But they also have their own security practices and set of guidelines and standards that we wouldn't want to go to bat with them and try to explain to them why that may not be relevant. We just want to make sure that we can check those boxes for them, so that they can fulfill their internal security mandate, right?
Yeah, of course. Okay, next question that we're seeing asked most often of our telco teams, or CSP, however you guys like to refer to yourselves, is that these projects are happening in silos within a large CSP. So the mobility team has made one big juicy e-commerce project, and we've automated a bunch of their back-end workflows. But the people who are in charge of home services and television services and home phone services and future-friendly home services, they're not aware of what was built over on the mobility side. So for the customer, the experience is disjointed still. And for the telco business, they're not sharing the programming that they've made to keep costs down, keep security measures down, all that kind of good stuff. So, how do we educate teams for how to adopt projects that other streams of that telco have built? Like, is there a way to share? How do you pass around the knowledge that, hey, this is dealer portal that I built might actually also work for your internal teams to buy their mobility devices and such? How do we handle that?
So, obviously we can only recommend on what we know. We can't recommend on something we don't know. But the tools that we have built, we're always like our software team lead layer is always kind of meeting together in conjunction with myself, and we have a good general awareness of all the projects and tools that we've built for telcos or a specific client. And it really comes down to that discovery process that we have. In that discovery, if we see that there's some commonality, or if there might be an opportunity to merge tools, or to have an API connection between the two to make to make them work better together, then we will of course bring that up and we will present that to the client. And it's kind of I'd say it's probably like a 50-50. Sometimes they know about the other tools, because sometimes we get a recommendation because we built another tool and a director or a VP on their side was like, hey, these guys built this cool tool for us. You could get them to build a tool for you. Sometimes they already know about it, and then sometimes they're completely like siloed, like as you were saying, and they have no idea, and then we draw that connection for them. So it really is just we have a pretty good communication with our kind of our architecture team, and if we're aware of another tool that we've built and we can see a fit, or we see an opportunity to retrofit it or use the same code or somehow optimize that new tool, we're gonna bring that up, and we're gonna try to make that happen. And most times, I'd say almost every time we've ever brought that up, it's always met with like it's a favorable idea, and we normally go and make those two tools interconnected, and you've got a better solution overall.
Yeah. Okay. Next question that I have on the list here that we got in through social media is around Acro Media's expertise. So yes, we've had telco customers for about 12 years, so we understand the industry inherently. That's the obvious answer. What makes us great at telco? What sets us apart from the next agency in the telco space with complex software? What is it, in your opinion?
Well, experience, like obviously, is the first one. You mentioned that. I think that comes with just working in understanding how to work as part of a team. Most of the projects that we run, we're part of a team. We are not the entire team. So we're working, like, we're heavily integrated with these with the teams on the telco side. I think that's a big bonus. We've learned how to work within that that area.
That's a pretty complicated relationship, and I think I'm glad that you pointed that out, because we understand the cycles of capital funding that telcos go through every year. We understand the compliancy, not just from an internet safety perspective, but from how the government regulates the usage of telecommunications sales and customers' expectations and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that is a really good point. Sorry, go ahead there. Is there anything else you want to add? I have a feeling what I think we're best at, but I want to see if you agree.
So yeah, like the experience, working as part of those teams, definitely a big one. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say past the experience, because so many things kind of come from that, right? Like working with these kind of more archaic systems, like I would say we've learned how to build numerous workarounds, especially in ways of performance, so that we can build a performant application, even though it's relying on a non-performant, whatever, a slow backend.
An oldie, yeah.
So we've actually built from the ground up a bunch of like kind of prefetching and asynchronous fetching options, as well as like heavy caching, like coming up with caching strategies so that we can hit their backend as little as possible. I would definitely say that has been solely driven by our telco interactions, because that's a common problem amongst them. I think we also have a really good understanding, at least at our architect level, we have a really good understanding of kind of the common players when it comes to technology, and also a lot of the kind of pitfalls of those technologies, and kind of how to make them all jive together. So for example, SSO is a common theme. Getting into, everybody's got a single sign-on service now, and they want it all to be integrated and all that jazz, and so that can actually be a relatively frustrating conversation for telcos, because a lot of times they know they need it, but they don't know, or they don't have the technology in-house, or it's not up to standard or whatnot. And so we've helped navigate some of those conversations by kind of almost like playing a middleman in those conversations, and being like, oh, well, you need this and you need this, so why don't you talk together, or we'll build a middleware that will connect the two, or something like that. So I think we have a good understanding of those. Just the technology around telcos that they're commonly going to use. That also includes like Salesforce and stuff like that, where we've built integrations, or we've had to work with Salesforce teams to bring in payloads that being delivered to our application from their CRM, and all sorts of things. So I think we have a good technology understanding of the kind of landscape as well. Yeah, I think that's about all that comes to mind.
Good answer. I like it. My instant thought around what makes Acro Media essentially a specialist in this area is everybody says automation. You know, like when I say everybody, I don't mean telcos. I mean software programmers and agencies say, "Oh, we can automate that for you." But the reality of automating in a business like telco is extremely complicated. Not just from a tech perspective, because systems are old and data formats are antiquated and they need to stay that way. And that's okay. We get that part, but also how much automation changes physical business practices within telcos. If you have a telco that has millions of customers, that means you have thousands of employees that are trained on these old systems, and that business impact piece has to be considered. And I think that our process for understanding that business impact and helping the customer actively choose where to automate and where not to automate, even though it might be possible across the board, understanding the technical impact, the changes to the business, and the changes to the employee training and behavior, as well as how is that going to impact the customer? Are things going to be different for them? I think that we understand those dips so well now that they're really second nature to us. And so when somebody comes and they says tells a telco that they should automate, I suspect the telco's like, you don't understand what automation would really mean in our world. But I think that Acro truly does understand what telco automation means. I think that's really where we've learned and have grown as a team in the last decade.
Mm-hmm. And I would agree. I think that like from the technical point of view, where the misunderstanding is always the lift. Because when it comes to a swivel chair process, and this is something we have done some of that, and I would say like this was our most complicated example, was a swivel chair process where basically orders were being taken in a portal, which we built, and being manually input into like multiple systems within this telco's backend. That swivel chair process was something that they vastly underestimated the effort, because getting the process out of a whole team, I think they had 30 people or 100 people that were running this manual process, the swivel chair process, and actually documenting and getting that process out of those people's heads and looking at all the nuances, all the little tiny things that would be very difficult to automate, because you might have this happen 0.5% of the time, but it's actually a critical flow, because if that turns into a fraudulent transaction or something like that, let's say a 0.5% fraud rate would be, that's millions of dollars for a company like that. And so we do have that experience. And I mean, it is a difficult thing in general to do that exercise, because you have to be so thorough and making sure that that there's a lot of planning and discovery that goes into the initial portion of that, or the initial, you start with a really good discovery and planning strategy, so that you can make sure that you uncover all of those little nuances, and then you can also decide, and in this situation I'm talking about, what ended up happening is we didn't have 100% automation. We had a percentage of automation that would reduce the majority of the lift, so that we could reduce that swivel chair process, but we couldn't eliminate it, because the amount of effort required to eliminate it was astronomical. And anyway, so yeah, it's very much about like uncovering and being really open and honest about, hey, you guys are trying to do like a very difficult thing here, because you've got some very, very a large amount of very small edge cases that are hard to code for, but what we can do is we can solve the majority of your problem, and make the majority of your flow a lot faster and more efficient, right?
That's a great point. When a director or a VP from a telco comes in with a mandate and says, our mandate is for you to automate this system, it's the responsibility of the agency to help that telco understand what the reality of that request is, because there are a lot of times when it's not worth the actual effort for an end-to-end automation. So yeah, that's back to that comment around partnering and being integrated into the team, and understanding that you could be setting a telco up to really fail if you just say, yes, we will do that. So
yeah. Exactly. Yeah, you definitely can't be a yes man in those situations, because otherwise you can get into a lot of hot water where you think it's going to be a 6-month effort, but it's actually a couple years worth of work, or maybe not that extreme, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're working with a telco and they want to talk about things like digitally bundling services, so you want to be able to offer your customers the ability to bundle their home internet with their television bundle with their mobility service. So in most telcos that we work with to scale, those are 3 separate teams. But the customer, they want to bundle those services. This is the most common thing we're hearing right now, bundling and automation. All of our questions coming in are around bundling and automation. Everybody's at home right now too, so people need these services combined. When you hear that, there are a lot of ways where you start to have to ask questions to find out, is this telco prepared for what they're taking on? The number one thing is there an appetite for this level of change within the organization? Do you have any comments on how to coach a telco teammate on how to suss out that information? How do we guide people to understand what they're actually asking and if it's achievable within their company? Do you have any advice around that?
I mean, it's achievable. It just depends on if the commitment is really there.
What does commitment mean to you? Are we talking time, money, resources? What does it mean?
All the above. It's all the above, because it has to be a change that is supported at the highest level, but it has to be a change that you're willing to support at your ground level, your developer level, right? I mean, I would say that the first step to that process is making sure that each of your departments that's probably a horrible thing to say, digitized or digitalized, where you have some sort of online presence. We've had some examples where those processes are email based, right? You can't really build automation around a web form that generates an email and sends it to a team that then manually ingests it, right? If you're really looking to do bundling, you've got to have, and again, I'm not talking about automation, I'm talking about bundling, right? You've got to have that process already sorted. So you've got to be able to order those things online, or have some sort of process that is, has your pricing, and because again, usually the point of bundling is discounting and other things like that. So if you buy 2 services, you get a discount here. If you buy 3, you get more discount. If you lock in for these terms, you get more discount, that sort of thing. So
we're talking about software that can change contract terms, look up where you are regionally, find out how long you've been a customer of this telco, and calculate that on the fly to offer you as the end user the best price on a term. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. And again, just going back to what's needed to get there is you have to have that kind of, you've got to be online and taking it right down to the root there. You've got to have some APIs that can expose that information, right? That's the biggest thing. If you guys are still using a proprietary tool that has to be used via swivel chair process, and there's no way to get that data out of that tool, the only way to get that data is to be sitting at a computer, logged on to their network, and authenticated into this tool. You're not ready for that exercise, because
how do you get ready? How do you get ready? Tell us how you get ready for that exercise. What's the step to get ready? What would be our first step if they came to us with nothing ready? What would we tell them to go back and do?
I mean, that's a very deep topic there. You would have to look at the way their internal systems are structured, because a lot of this stuff is proprietary software deployed to what we were talking about before, their private data center. It's probably closed source software, either they don't have the ability to modify it, or anyways, it really comes down. Yeah, but let's just take it from the ideal. So if we had unlimited funds and unlimited resources, we start with building an API, right? So we go directly into their data source, their databases, or whatever it is, and we start building an API that can both, read and write that data. That would be the very first step. Then obviously you want to get that data out to the internet, because we're talking about going to the cloud here. We're not talking about, we never want to be looking at us having to work in their personal data center, right? We want to be working on the cloud. We want to establish secure communication between their internal systems and our cloud systems, right? And that can completely be done. So we build an API in their system. You build it in a microservice architecture. You make it so that, it's secure, it's robust, all that other sort of stuff. That's the first thing, really. And basically what that's doing is it's allowing us to access that same data that they're accessing via that internal tool. And now we can access that via an API. Now we can actually do something with it. At that point in time, yeah.
So wait, pause here for me. Step one is find out where your data is. Step two is modernize your data architecture through a microservice setup and bidirectional API or middleware, bidirectional APIs so you can get data in, get data out. And then after you have that fundamental tech layer built, now you have choices. How do we want to let CSRs interact with it? Who do you want to push it to sell? Marketing can interact with it. Customers have options available to them for discounts, and we can visibly see their contracts, even bill payment, things like that. So, okay, so a modernized architecture, some research, some homework, some documentation, clean up that architecture. Give me a wild guess. People think that's going to take how long, and how long does it actually take?
Yeah, that's such a big variable, though. Like, I mean, I would say, and it also depends on the scope of it. Like, are you taking a very simple thing, like maybe, I don't know what the simplest thing would be, maybe internet, compared to mobility or compared to some of the other stuff, internet plans are fairly straightforward. Do you want to just have the ability to change your plan, like what plan you're on, or do you want to have the ability to like view usage and, overages and all that other stuff? Like, those are all systems that, would increase that the scope of what you're trying to do. But I mean, yeah, it would be, it's not a small undertaking. It never is, especially if you're not in that place. If you're not already on a software layer that has APIs and you're building that all from scratch, I'd say the undertaking is massive. And it probably involves, at the same time, again, trying to look at like, how do you modernize the entire organization, not just a specific piece of it. I would want to evaluate why you're using that system in the first place. Why are you on an archaic tool? And maybe the actual real play here is to rebuild that entire tool, so that now you're not going to have an old tool with a new API running side by side. You're actually just going to rebuild the old tool to be kind of like an API-driven tool in the first place. And now you've got probably a better UI, a better user experience for your swivel chair process, as well as, looking at, creating that API first approach so that you can now give that information out to other consumers, build other tools, other, UIs off of that, and open up your organization entirely. But that process, I don't know how long it would take. I would be guessing if I had to say, but it would not be a light lift. And it's probably going to take longer than you expect, because these big organizations, there's often a lot of resistance to that kind of change as well, right? Because you're probably upsetting some sort of internal IT team that is going to be happy operating the way they are. And this is going to really show either gaps in skill set, and I mean, I'm really kind of saying it here, but it's going to disrupt a lot of things internally, because now you're asking your, people that have done things a certain way for such a long time to really step up and be like, let's modernize, let's change the way we're thinking about this. And it's probably going to disrupt your security layer as well, because you're going to have to look at new technologies. You're going to have to look at, how can we actually deliver this out to the internet securely and make it so that we can build, cool stuff. Whereas, when you have like a DMZ or you've got a big firewall, it's very easy to get careless with your, it's very easy to just have that big shield, and everybody's just comfortable being behind the big shield because they know nothing can get into that shield. But all of a sudden you're talking about poking a hole through that shield, and now making sure that you're doing that in a modern, a safe, a secure way. Making sure you have all the process around, client onboarding, again, if you're going to use OAuth or some other, spec to do that, making sure you have a good provider for that, all this sort of stuff. So there's a lot of management that comes around that, but
okay, great. That was great. Okay, Jesse, one more question that I want to ask you here. The question I want to ask you is a little bit conceptual.
Okay.
And so this is just straight up your opinion, based on your decades worth of experience. We hear this buzz term, digital transformation. And digital transformation, means a lot of things, but it's basically we're an older industry and we're trying to get online and have some sex appeal. We need to modernize. It saves us money and it's better for the customer. So we're going to make money if we can digitally transform. I would love to hear your perspective on what it takes to be the leader in a CSP or telco to genuinely drive digital transformation. We've worked with some incredible leaders at the highest level in telcos, and there's something different about them because they actually have the appetite for the discomfort to go through this process. Can you give us your sentiment on what it actually means to see this through from the highest level of leadership? The team will do all of the smart and important steps to get there, but what does that level of leadership look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it can be a hype machine. There's got to be obviously some hype involved because you're doing something cool and new, but it can't be entirely driven on hype because we've seen that fail. Where we have one example where there was a massive hype machine that was driving this change. There was like, I think it was probably like 300 developers, maybe 350 developers on board making this change happen, and then they encountered the first hurdle that didn't really go well. The hype machine died, and I believe it took them about 2 years to kind of there was a bunch of there's a whole bunch of kerfuffle happening, but basically the hype machine died, and it took them about 2 years to kind of get back on their feet. That's a terrible thing to see happen, and I think it was. Yeah. I think it's a long game. You're not playing a short game with digital transformation. You want to be a leader. It's about making the building blocks happen, setting that foundation so that you can actually make that a reality long term, right? And like I said, it's about getting those, starting to look at things from an API point of view, right? Realizing that that's the way the entire internet has gone. Look at the leaders, Facebook, Google, all those guys. They're all API driven, right? Realizing that that's where things have to start, and it's a long game. Yeah, so I'm not really sure if that's making a whole lot of sense, but yeah, don't build it on hype. Don't think it's going to happen quick and easy. Build a team internally as well. That's really important. I don't think that's a vendor operation. I really don't. This is something that you need to have internal. You've got to have the people internally that can take it long term. Vendors obviously help a great deal. Like that's obviously what we do.
They get you expertise, they get you velocity, but they can't pair that back to the business drive for you. You have to have somebody on the ground with them.
Exactly. And I mean, you can have a long-term like kind of consulting relationship with a vendor where, they've got people embedded in a longer term, but not at the same capacity. But I mean, yeah, if you got a large telco company, you could be talking about hundreds or maybe even thousands of employees that are needed to drive. Telco is a very complicated industry. It really is. There's a lot of variables there. And yeah, you've got to have people with boots on the ground that are in-house, that are, running the internal agenda of the company, and also have the skills to do that, right?
Yeah.
You've got to have an architect. You've got to have a CTO or whoever is in that role that can drive the vision and make sure that vision is modern and is using the tools that are available to make that dream happen. And then use your vendors and other support to help guide that vision. But yeah, you got to have boots on the ground. You got to have the staff internally, because it's a long game. It's definitely not a short game.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Perfect. Any other comments that you want to make just before we wrap up?
No, I think we covered a lot. Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot else to add.
Okay, cool.